about your, oh, that would be great.
And I will pass these out.
Secretary promised to print out pictures of Michelangelo's Moses, but I see they're not there, so I printed out just in case, 20. So please share, but not one for each. There are only 20 there. And I will conclude with some remarks about Michelangelo's Moses, who figured pretty much in the Parasja of the week. So let me offer some reflections on Carol's and my visit to Rome for spring semester. Actually, Rabbi Graver asked me in particular to reflect on our experience in Rome, so the topic is at his personal request, and I will conclude with some exegetical reflections on the horns of Moses, which you will see in the picture. So being in Rome was thrilling for both of us, and teaching at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, which is the Jesuit University of the Pope, which exists really in 3 parts, but 2 of which are in Piazza della Pilota, the square of Pontius Pilate, about 200 meters from the Fountain of Trevi, which is an absolutely gorgeous place to be, to teach, and to reflect. I always thought Jerusalem had the most interesting ruins and antiquities in the world, and I can now say that Jerusalem has its equal challenge in the city of Rome. We lived in 2 apartments, one further out and then one close in for the last part of our visit. The first was close to the 3rd century Aurelian Wall, which was the first vision on our walk into the office. It was also near a pyramid of Gaius Cassius, a leading citizen of Rome in the 1st century BCE, and had a very unusual tomb built for him next to the Protestant or non-Catholic cemetery, the only one in Rome, we're told, where Byron and Shelley, among others, and Goethe's son is buried. That was close to our first apartment. But most notably, we were close to the Baths of Caracalla, which was the thrilling part of our morning walk down to the Colosseum, beyond the Capitoline Hill, through the Imperial Fora, and finally Trajan's Column as we walked into Piazza della Pilota, Pontius Pilate Square. It was thrilling, I must say, to live in a city that has so many historical monuments and historical records on every square virtually. And if you follow the papers lately, the subway line C has run up against another monster discovery. It's now delayed 17 years because of things that have turned up underground, and underground Rome is as wondrous as underground Jerusalem. And in our last apartment, we lived about 5-minute walk from the Colosseum and next to one of the great aqueducts on the Villa Claudia. So that was really shortened our walk, but it made it even more interesting. I want to say something about working within the framework of the Roman Catholic Church and explain some things that you might not know. The Vatican owns enormous properties in Italy and around the world. I mean, it's one of the wealthiest entities that you can imagine, despite the payouts that you know about that have been happening over the last decade in the scandal that still infects the church and is in front of the news today, yesterday, and probably will stay until the President Cardinal Pell is dealt with, and this is a stain on the church. But I want to reflect on some things about the church that are much more positive. And let me tell you something about our students. They were all mature priests in their 30s, most of them, from all over the world. We didn't have a single Italian student. We had Asians and Africans, Filipinos, and Eastern Europeans mainly, who were not all Jesuits, many different order priests. And as you can imagine, they were very much keen on listening and paying attention. Not quite different experience from teaching undergraduates who are not always tuned and hanging on every word, so to speak. And one was nicer than the other, really. We have made friends in the four corners of the globe now and feel very close to these men whose orders really dictate the kind of life that they're going to lead. I always thought Franciscans, were just involved in maintaining the holy places in the Middle East. We had a Franciscan whose order in Canada is very much committed to helping the poor, just like Pope Francis is a Franciscan. And other orders also are doing fantastic things in Africa to bring wells. One student we ate at his order in his community, which is a 19th century order, is dedicated to building wells and bringing clean water to African communities. And, when in hearing all this, I said, wow, this is pretty amazing. And although they are called missionaries, we began to develop a much more positive spin, feeling for the kind of dedicated work that they're doing. I felt also that the Catholic Church is not, even though they call this missionary work, they were not hell-bent on converting the people with whom they invested time and effort in helping, but they truly wanted to help and make this a better world. So we were very impressed with the kind of tikkun olam that we saw in the Catholic Church, and that doesn't come out, at least in my experience, very, very much. Our dean, with whom we were very close, a graduate of my department at Harvard, and another colleague, and another graduate of my department at Harvard. Our dean is a Boy Scout master, and every spare minute he has, he's with his Boy Scouts. Overnights, teaching them and taking hikes with them. And another priest from Malta who teaches archaeology. He's a Boy Scout master and very dedicated. Our TA went around for the Easter holidays blessing apartments in Rome with a special blessing for the holy days. And he went to 150 apartments close to where he was, just offering special blessing for the holy season. And we were impressed with this, and they spoke so lovingly about the need to do this that it became very much a positive experience for us as well. And I think developing a positive attitude towards Christianity in general has been a problem for the Jewish people. And there's good reason for that. I'm sure you will agree that anti-Semitism at the hands of the church has been a major challenge for the Jewish people throughout history. But I think it's incumbent upon us as a minority group in the United States and in the world, 14.5 million, I guess, of Jews in the world, to try and understand the more positive aspects of Christianity, and I want to return to that in a second. But if you are in Italy for an extended period, as we were, its art, its music, its architecture, its church is all infused with the story of the Bible. And we were in that part of the Jesuit university system that was totally dedicated to biblical studies, the Pontifical Biblical Institute, for short, known as the Biblicum. And boy, do they get into the Bible, Old and New Testament, and very, very significant. Its sister university across the street really picks up where the New Testament ends and takes it on down to the present. We had one experience with the head of the Jewish Christian Institute, the Cardinal Bay Institute at the university, which is kind of a negative story, but I'll mention it to you anyway because our feelings of the Jewish community were not so positive. The Jewish community, I'll start with a negative experience we had at the Israeli ambassador to the Vatican, and Carol will pinch me, and she pinched me there for not getting too excited. First thing, the ambassador shakes our hand, welcomes us to his house and to Rome and teaching here and so on. And then he says, I bet you're pretty happy now that President Trump has been elected and that you can say the words radical Islam in peace. That's when Carol pinches me and said, don't say anything, don't say anything. We also met the head of the Jewish community of Rome there. And this was early on, and we wanted to know some things about the nature of the Jewish community. He says, well, you know, there's the great temple, and there's nothing else beside that. As we came to learn that the Jewish community in Rome does not recognize Reform, Conservative, Reconstruction, or any other kind, even though they do exist, the head of the Jewish community says they don't exist. And that reflects the kind of superior feeling that the main synagogue in Rome and the chief rabbi has. And there are only 14,000 Jews in Rome, 25,000 Jews in all of Italy. It is a dying community, and it has these magnificent synagogues that are now more or less museums, and a couple of functioning. The temple in Rome is a functioning congregation and absolutely exquisite. I had an aliyah there and attended services, and it was quite exciting. But back to this theme of appreciating Christianity in Italy. I mean, you have to, if Jews who are so immersed in the biblical story, you gotta love it when you go to a church and you see all of these Old Testament scenes depicted in living color, and it's quite thrilling. And the music and all that the church presents, you have to have a more positive attitude if you're going to really appreciate Italy. I want to tell another story, personal story. When I was head of a Hebrew high school in graduate school in Boston at Temple, Michigan, Tefillah, we, with a very distinguished faculty, all who went on to careers in academics, all PhD candidates, either at Brandeis or Harvard, we had a little section in a required course on Christianity, because we thought it was important for Jews to learn something about Christianity and its complexity, its richness, and its close attachment to the Hebrew Bible and the narrative of the Old Testament, to use the Christian term. Well, all hell broke loose in Congregation Michigan Tefillah when many of the parents heard about the curriculum that we were teaching Christianity. We were teaching about Christianity and the close ties that binds Jews and Christians together. And the rabbi defended us and so on and so forth, and we got over it. But when I say that Jews have had this problem, I'm quite serious about it. And I think it's incumbent upon us all to gain an appreciation, be sensitive toward Christianity in all its richness and Roman Catholicism. And when it comes to the beauty of what it has done around the world, we have to be sensitive and appreciative of the enormous gift to society that the church has left, just in the form of its art, music, and literature. Now, to Moses, which is part of that legacy. I wanted to give a little Devar about Michelangelo's Moses, and I want you to note, for those of you who have the print of the statue before you, note I couldn't get a good shot of it, but you'll see one horn, but there are two horns in the statue, but because of the way it's angled and the gates in front of it, I couldn't get a good shot with both the horns. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the horns of Moses, and I'll begin with the story when I was a freshman at Dartmouth College in 1958. I have a roommate from Chicago, John Blue, and we have bunk beds. I'm in the upper bunk in a small room in Hanover, New Hampshire. One morning, like 3 a.m. or something, I feel somebody reaching into my scalp, rubbing my head. And I wake up and I said, "What in the hell are you doing, John?" He says, "I'm looking for your horns." He says, "I thought all Jews had horns, or at least traces of the horns." And he mentioned Michelangelo's Moses and other depictions he had seen as a child growing up. Well, we did not become best friends, and I couldn't wait to get rid of that roommate. I mean, from Chicago, can you imagine? But that was 1958. And I want to tell you how this has traditionally been explained and offer an alternative explanation, which one of our colleagues, a temporary colleague in Rome, offered, Thomas Römer, a very distinguished, well-known scholar who teaches in Paris at the Collège de France and at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, half and half each year. Very distinguished scholar. And we did see David that is Michelangelo's David, in the Académie in Florence, where Michelangelo is from, and we love David, and it's awesomely impressive. But living close, just a few blocks from Moses, we visited him regularly and made those who visited us visit Moses regularly. And the power of this statue, this sculpture for us, it was one of the most memorable things for us, and we had to go say goodbye. And as a matter of fact, we said goodbye twice in a very emotional way. We were not too far away, and Carol and I said, "Well, let's go back again one more time and look at him." But now I want to talk about the horns. The traditional explanation for Moses' horns, and it's not just Michelangelo. If you go to medieval art, you will see satanic, diabolical portraits of Judas Iscariot and Jews in all forms with horns on them, horns of the devil. Saint Jerome, the translator of the Latin Vulgate, which became the standard Latin version in use in the Roman Catholic Church to this day, followed by the Syriac and the Septuagint Greek translation, translates Exodus 34, verse 29, this way: as Moses came down from the mountain, bearing 2 tablets of the pact, Luchot Brit, and note that Michelangelo's got that right. You can only see one, but when you're standing up close, there are 2 tablets there in Michelangelo. Moses was not aware that the skin on his face was radiant, karan or panav, since he had spoken with God face to face. The term karan, kuf resh nun, is very curious. It's a hapax, and but kuf resh nun also means horns or rays, as in sun's rays. And so the Quran is translated as radiant, which is what Septuagint and Syriac and other versions support. But since it means horns, you can see that many people misinterpreted that verse as a diabolical support, so to speak, for presenting Jews or Moses with these evil horns. Now, our colleague Thomas Römer, also pronounced Romer by people who don't know what the umlaut is, wants to understand the horns in a different way. He correctly points out that the golden calf and the bull and iconography of the ancient Near East refers to horns as something of strength. And we have a number of bull discoveries in archaeology to support this. And he wants to understand Moses coming down from the mountain with horns as a kind of sign of strength. And this is supported by iconography. And so he would translate the skin of Moses' face became horned, literally, which of course would require a rather long explanation because it's one of the most awkward translations. This guy is really one of the most highly regarded scholars in the Hebrew Bible today. He just published a book in 2017 on the origins of God, published by Harvard University Press. He holds 2 chairs in 2 different universities in 2 countries. And he wants to read that with the positive symbolism of the horn in mind. This would, in effect, remove the stigma of horns and satanic association with the Jewish people. This is clearly a philo-Semitic move on his part. I mean, he is totally philo-Semitic. He's now going to excavate in Israel with Tel Aviv University. He loves Jewish people. But I think it misses the true meaning of the text. Karan, a verbal adjective meaning rosy, radiant, ebullient, shiny face, which is the way Jewish tradition and most people who read the text in a positive way have understood it. All these painters who paint Jews with horns and satanic figures obviously understood it in quite a different way. So, if we take Jerome's mistranslation as accidental, let us go back to the text and understand it as meaning radiant, and I'm quite happy with that. So, as for Michelangelo's Moses, this sculpture is so magnificent. Perhaps we can look at it now with new eyes, afresh, and understand something more about the horns, at least I hope after this little recollection that you will do this. The power of his face, the magnificence of the posture of that statue was our most emotional goodbye, I think, that we said to Rome. St. Pietro in Vincoli is the church where it sits, off the beaten track, off the Via Cavour in the Monte area. And I hope that an appreciation, that you might share this appreciation of Moses with us as also a symbol of Judaism's irreversible connection to Christianity in all its form, in all its beauty. And it's, I think, incumbent upon us to really opt for a positive assessment of that relationship. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.